viewing local locations then and now. The Stewart Chamber of Commerce building, built in the early 1950s. The building is still there. Not a Chamber of Commerce, but repurposed, right at US 1. Note the brick on the side. It came originally from the Bessie Perkins Shepherd home that was right there at Shepherd Park at one time. In 1949, when the house burned, the bricks from that home, the Shepherd house, were saved to use by this building. The Clifton Lodge along Seminole Street, built by Sam Matthews for his own use in the early 1910s. Matthews sold this house and built another. This has become a very popular lodge over the years. It had to be moved recently. Stephen Vitale moved it farther down along Seminole Street to preserve it. The Dudley, and then later the Herbert Bessie home. Built in 1909 along Atlanta Avenue, it is now the Yacht Sales Company offices. Located by Confusion Corner, Kindred's Groceries was there at one time. Now it's Ocean One, featuring individual offices. In the 1950s, it was King Pontiac Motors and also a Gulf filling station right there on the corner of Colorado. Later in the 60s, it was Merkel Motors there. For years, it's now been several small shops in that area. Along the former 7th Street, which is now known as Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, in the late 50s is when a new post office went in for Stewart. Now it's the Supervisor of Elections headquarters. The railroad bridge across the St. Lucie River. First one was in 1895 and it was wooden. Metal ones were then later built. The last major railroad bridge constructed across the St. Lucie, still in use today, was built in 1938. In Jensen Beach, there was built the brick block, or the Rico building it's known as, and that was done in 1908. It had several different kinds of shops, a post office for Jensen, and insurance offices. Now the building is the lovely Jensen Inn, the corner of Jensen Beach Boulevard near the railroad crossing. Located on US 1 and built in 1928 by the Roebuck family, is the Rob Roy Hotel and Restaurant. By the late 1940s, the new owners renamed it Rice's. It's a true landmark of US 1. Now that it's been totally renovated and is used by Stratacon Company for their headquarters, it has been even inspected by descendants of the Roebuck family, and they approve of it. In September 1923, the newest school building opened up. It's located alongside what is today Stewart Middle School. All grades 1 through 12 attended. It was named originally the Stewart High School, then in late 1940s renamed Martin County High. Since 1964, the former school serves as the instructional center and for the school board meetings. Now it will become soon the Cultural Arts Center. The original 1909 schoolhouse, different location, had an addition placed in the front of it by the 1930s. This would make it serve then as the courthouse. By the 1990s, just the courthouse in front was left standing and to serve today as the Cultural Arts Center. The lovely Seminole Inn, located in Indiantown, was built in 1927. Over the decades, it's been a featured great area for the hotel rooms and the restaurant. Super strong, wide concrete walls has served as a shelter even during storms. It's been owned and operated by the Wall family since the 1970s. Henry and Abby Sewell's house was at one time at the south end of Sewell's Point in the 1890s. Later moved along Willoughby Creek, and then most recently near Indian Riverside Park. It's been restored and is doing very well. It is owned by the county. The Sewell's house. It has been open to the public in the past to tour it, along with having reenactors playing the part of Henry and Abby Sewell. Drive by to see it from the outside also. St. Mary's Episcopal Church on East Ocean Boulevard. It was built there in 1950. It's its second church building. The first one was the 1895 Community Church on 3rd Street. The church has a very large congregation. The inside is lovely. Plus, there's a large auditorium on the grounds. In Hope Sound, there's St. Ange's Store, been there since the 1930s. Now the posh Pineapple Shop is filled with all types of gift items. Selling at the corner of Mars and Dixie Highway in Hope Sound, it offers hostess gifts, home accessories, jewelry, art, baby, pet gifts, and more. At the end of St. Lucie Avenue, right along the river, built in 1916, was the St. Lucie Hotel Annex, an extra building. It was then later moved a few feet in 1926 to the corner of Seminole Street and St. Lucie Avenue. It has had many different businesses in that building. Now it's the Stewart Boathouse Restaurant. A great place downstairs. There's outdoor seating and seating upstairs. This building is over 104 years old and still going strong. In the early 1950s, the new and modern Stewart department store. Now it's the Stewart Visitor Center and city offices near City Hall. The Sunrise Apartments on Camden Avenue, built in 1927. These great apartments are right in town, still in use today and just as popular. Lovely each one of the 5 different apartments. Built so strong, it has held up against many hurricanes over the decades. On Camden, notice the original building has the marking of its name still embedded. Taylor Ashley Insurance and Real Estate Office. It was first downtown on Osceola. Then they built this new office in the mid-50s. Always family owned. This is located along Colorado Avenue, the intersection of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, by the circled traffic that has the fountain. One of the earliest businesses built out along Colorado Avenue years ago. The corner of Albany Avenue and Joan Jefferson Street near US 1. This house was built in 1902 for the George Thomas family. It survived the 1916 fire that destroyed many nearby structures. The family sold it in the 1970s, now having been home to many businesses over the years. Pure Victorian style. On Sewell's Point, on a hill, is the Tuckahoe Mansion. built in the 1930s for the Leach family from Georgia. The family, by the early 50s, sold it to serve as a convent for nuns. It later becomes St. Joseph College, run by the nuns. It was in the 1970s that it becomes FIT College. But it does sit empty for the 1990s, restored by the county and returned to its glory of the 1930s, overlooking the lovely Indian River. It can be rented for special events such as weddings. This was the future US 1 back in 1909, just a dirt path. Later it would be named Avenue E, then Alabama Avenue. Finally it becomes US 1 by the 1920s. This aerial view of US 1 in 1966, and then at the ground level, traffic today. About 1909, this particular path with the small wooden bridge was over Fraser Creek. This is the same route that would eventually be US 1. A larger bridge over Fraser Creek was then put in place by the 1940s. And now you'll see an aerial view from 1966 and 67 of US 1 through Stewart. Winn-Dixie grocery store along Colorado Avenue and 5th Street in the 1950s. Lovett's food store also there. Then later was the Babcock furniture store, and then law offices. It was major renovation done, and now it's a very popular location for a variety of stores and shops, and solely named the 555 Place. Stewart Women's Club, located along East Ocean Boulevard. The club started originally in 1913. This would be its third clubhouse, built in the late 1950s. It's been used over the years for many community programs, kept in very good condition by the club members. Woodman Hall at Akron Avenue and 3rd Street, built in 1914 for the Woodmen of the World organization. A meeting hall is upstairs, and the first floor was used for years by the telephone company, using phone operators. The building was restored in the 1990s and used by different businesses. It is now owned by an insurance company who truly loves its history. Now to look at those historic places that no longer exist. Built in 1926, these apartment buildings were known as the El Bitlor, finest in the area. In the 1930s, it became the Atlantic Court under new owners, eventually torn down in the late 1990s. Wild Bill's Indian Village, featuring wild animals such as alligators, located on US 1 in Hope Sound. It was eventually dismantled in the 1940s. Bruce and Harry's Restaurant on US 1 Colorado Avenue in the 1950s. Property purchased by the future Seacoast Bank in 1960. Casa Lumber Company along Flagler Avenue and the railroad tracks, near the courthouse and the water tower. Served the area for decades. The Danforth Hotel, built in 1902 along the St. Lucie River. It was torn down in 1920. The FEC train depots, all gone. The Salerno and the Jensen one. The second Stewart train station was located across from the Lyric Theater. It was built there in 1913. Then we have the Indiantown station. Both are all gone. Now the Hopestown train station, that was saved. It was repositioned and moved westward from its original location, now part of the Hopestown Polo Grounds. Many structures were taken down to make way for other buildings or different purposes. The Browning Building. It was selling cars in the 1920s at the corner of Flagler and East Ocean Boulevard. Later, that building becomes part of the courthouse. Next gone is the Virginia Apartments on US 1, torn down a few years ago. The Fraser Home, also on US 1, built in 1916, torn down last year, 2019. And then the Royal Castle Shop on US 1 opened in July of '64. Hamburgers were 15 cents. It was torn down about 1980. The Hibiscus Apartments were built in the 1920s, located on US 1. They were torn down in 2019. The new Kindred's grocery store, their second one, opened in April 1961, Colorado Avenue and Kindred Avenue. That, then in the mid-1960s, it becomes a Great Value store. Now it's been converted, those buildings, into smaller shops. Very old here, dating back to 1895, the original train station's on the left, right across from the Walter Kitching store, next to the freight station. The Kitching store, his first one, was torn down in 1928. Built in 1905, Bosser Kitching's boarding house was upstairs on the second floor, yet the post office and a store were on the first floor. The whole building torn down in the early 1930s. Structures that caught fire. The former Kitching home on the right, where Bosser Kitching and his sister Susan once lived, later caught fire in the late 1930s. Then you have the Grand Al Frisco Hotel, built in the 1890s in Jensen, burned to the ground in 1910. The building was first known as Speedy's Inn in the 1930s, along US 1, north of the St. Lucie River. Then it became the Lighthouse Restaurant, very popular. It burned in 1956, but was rebuilt and had to be then torn down in 1962 for the widening of US 1. Downtown Stuart had the Peacock Arcade. It was a hotel, restaurant, and shops, built in 1926. The name did change over the years with different owners. In January 1959, it was the Commodore Hotel, and it burned to the ground. The Charles Racy home of Sewell's Point, built in 1890, caught fire in 1921, burning to the ground. The Salerno Inn, built in 1916, burned in 1927. There was a big fire in January 1st, 1916, in many portions of downtown Stuart. Burned to the ground was the Methodist Church. And then the St. Joseph Church on East Ocean, burned down in 1959. Structures were torn down just because they were old. The Stuart Hotel, built in 1891, had been added to over the years many times. It was eventually torn down then in June 1966. The St. Lucie Hotel, built in 1913 along St. Lucie Avenue, also met the same fate and torn down in September 1967. The Sunrise Inn in Port Sewell was built in 1910, then rebuilt in 1919 to modernize it, and then added to over the years to come. It eventually becomes the Bay Harbor Club in 1972 with new owners. Eventually, even that is torn down in 1995. The Stuart department store of the 1930s served for years as it faced Flagler Avenue. It was eventually torn down in the late 60s. Several places have been destroyed over the years by hurricanes. The second Walter Kitching store, constructed on First Street, was built in February 1914. In August of 1926, though, a hurricane destroyed it. Then you have the Mid-Rivers Yacht Club in Sewell's Point, built in 1909, and it was destroyed in the September 1928 hurricane. Two separate ones then. The popular St. Lucie River Yacht Club, filled with entertainment all the time. It was located near the George Park store and built out in the St. Lucie River in 1918. It was even enlarged by 1922. It was so popular. It is destroyed by the September 1928 hurricane also. Historical preservation. Now that's important. Not just the structures, but let's make sure we save the photos, the journals, the documents, etc. Save our Stuart history. Support the Stuart Heritage Museum on Flagler.